Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome, everybody, to Breaking Change, a podcast production by Justin Searles Co. Our humble little studio where the podcast is free, but comes with a lifetime guarantee that you will not regret listening to the program. Today, exciting stuff, because this is going to be my, speaking of the studio with the fancy microphone, still tilted upside down because it seems to be catching fewer mouth sounds as I lean back to swallow to spare you the biology aspect of what it is to talk into a microphone for some number of minutes or hours. This is going to be the last episode for a little while, at least as recorded in this studio. I'm going to be spending a little bit of time this weekend. I'm recording here Friday, April, as I'm steering around the boom mic arm, Friday, April 26th, a little after 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, daylight time. Before I die, one of my life goals is to keep straight which one is standard and which one is daylight. I imagine we're in daylight savings time, and so then it would be Eastern daylight, but just like all other measurements in the Western world, at least the imperial ones, I have no faith that daylight doesn't actually mean not daylight savings time, like just normal daylight time. So, unconfident. I actually know a couple developers, and this is true to type, who are so focused on being technically correct or so driven to make everything in their life consistent and predictable that they actually live their life in UTC. Their computer, their Apple Watch, their phone, all UTC. They don't, or Greenwich Mean Time, I suppose. If whatever your operating system is doesn't have like a literal I'm one of those weirdos button that'll literally show UTC as if it were a time zone, I guess they just type Greenwich into the time zone configurator in their calendar app. And unless you live in Greenwich, I'm a strong believer that you shouldn't do that. Because the thing about time is it's primarily not about like your own ability to keep track of when things are. It's actually only relevant insofar as the relation between you and others. That is what time is for. If there were no other people, we wouldn't even need time. We would probably just look out the window, if we even had windows, right? And sun's up, sun's down. Better way to live, I say. Abolish clocks. Anyway, off to a roaring start. Welcome to Breaking Change. This program, this version's Breaking Change, titled I'm Feeling Unlucky. I'll let you infer meaning from that. And we'll get into that during the news portion. But first, a little bit of life update. I've been catching up with a lot of colleagues and friends recently. I've been on as I get older, I just will call people. You know, I'll get a text message and I'll think, I could respond to this text message. I'm fancy. I know how I could leave a voice memo. Or I could just, be a total monster and call them out of the blue and potentially force them to shit their pants because people don't do that anymore. And I'm surprised how often people pick up, which is to say more than never. But I was on a less jarring and actually scheduled phone call. Honestly, maybe the reason that I've come to like ad hoc calls is I hate anticipating calls. I hate planning my whole day around, well, I got to talk to so-and-so at 2:00 today, and it's like 10 a.m., which is irrelevant because I'm speaking to you. So as a unit of measure, time is quite useful. You can imagine, oh, yeah, I roughly know what 4 hours feels like. Doesn't matter what time zone, though, because we're talking about durations. Fucking living in UTC. What kind of mad lad? uh, anyway, it's 10 a.m. I should be getting stuff done. I got a lot to do. Maybe I got a lot of creative energy. I want to build something today, but I'm like, well, but 4 hours from now, I got this call. So I should probably get my workout in now. So that's out of the way. I should probably, because I'm not going to have the energy after the call necessarily to do my email and get caught up on these other sort of like got to do items. And I kind of enter into this, you can even hear it in my voice now, this sort of just like depressed malaise of it totally saps my creativity. Because for me to produce creative work and the way that I program my computer machines is all, it comes from the whatever the creative dongle in your brain is, whatever module of gray matter is the fun, happy, I'm painting, part of the brain. I'm sure the programming comes from, much more perfunctory parts of some other people's brains. But for me, if having a meeting on the calendar the same day is enough to just completely sap any ability for me to produce anything at all interesting, I'll get all context switchy and dreadful, as in I am in a dready mood. And I'll just come to dread the thing that's coming up, and everything just becomes such a slog. So ad hoc phone calls are preferable to scheduling something. Somebody saying, let's get something on the calendar is, if I was ever, a centerfold, I do work out in a magazine, under the little profile, right? Turn offs would include, let's get something on the calendar. Probably that would be a second place to somebody just putting shit on my calendar, sight unseen, with no communication or no consent on my part. I believe in affirmative consent is what I'm getting at. And if somebody hasn't agreed to a time and place and date, whether in UTC or not, to if they've not run it by you, hey, is Thursday at 2 cool? And then you say yes or no. And if you say yes, then they may send you the invite. But if you just get an invite in the blue because you weren't busy in your calendar, I think that the only exception is if you use one of the appointment widgets like Calendly. If you're one of those people who, you probably are on the phone a lot, then you're putting out the welcome mat for people to schedule time with you. But if you're just like, at a standard, especially in an office setting where you've got busy time and you've got, like working hours configured in some calendar somewhere, and someone's like, oh, well, so-and-so's like, they've got a block of time here from 9 to 2. So that must mean they're not busy. So I'm going to just like throw something in right smack in the middle. Just break up their day. They'll be so delighted to see me, thinks the social butterfly that is the person who does that. So fuck that guy. And the calendaring horse he rode in on. Just don't do that. If you work with people who are creatives, if you work with people who like actually think for a living, and you throw shit on their calendar, I think that is one of the most selfish. It's a power move, right? It's a flex. It's like, to me, it is similar to a boss walking into a room, staring over your shoulder, interrogating you about, oh yeah, how you doing that? Making passive aggressive comments to say like, I have the authority to determine how you spend your time at this granular a level is tantamount to saying, I know how to do your job for you. Or worse, what you're doing for your job is less valuable than what I need from you via apparently synchronous communication. And to do it with a recurring calendar event that's like shaking down a kid for lunch money and then telling him, I'll be back tomorrow, you know? And he's got the wedgie, and you got the what is the like late 80s trope of like grab him by the ankles and the sneakers are almost popping off and you're shaking out all the coins from his jean jorts. That's what it's like. That's how I feel when you send me a recurring calendar invite. So don't do it unless everybody's on board and there's not a power dynamic or power gradient where no one would be comfortable telling you no. That's my policy. So anyway, I call people, and I was on the phone, and I was like, well, since I'm, this was a scheduled call, but because we were, the individual I was talking to, he mentioned, hey, I want to take a walk, so let's just do it by audio. And I was like, okay, cool. And I had like literally five errands to run, all in the same little set of strip malls, 8 minutes from my house. And I thought, okay, I will run these errands while I talk to the individual. And the errand that I was running while we started the call was I was gassing up my 2020 Ford Escape Hybrid. Rolls off the tongue. So it's a small subcompact SUV, I think is the category. And it's a hybrid electric. And I live in an area where all you do is like 45 mile per hour speed bump heavy Disney driving, which is great for a hybrid. So I average like 55, 60 miles per gallon sometimes on that thing. And in addition to being generally insulated from a lot of the inflationary pressures that like get on the news, I don't think about the price at the gas pump, right? Because I'm there literally once every 6 weeks, maybe. But that's how long. And that's like our primary vehicle is my car, and that's how little driving we do. Even though we go out a lot, like it's just that's a lot of gas mileage. And when you live literally next door to a theme park, and we have a very small radius, is what I'm saying. So I was gassing up the car, and I mentioned on the phone, yeah, I'm just here for my bi-monthly gas up. And a dude in a very large truck that seemed like, had to guess, probably gets worse gas mileage than my subcompact hybrid SUV, which would have been a sedan if only Ford still sold those. He looks at me and stares at me, and it's not like a nice stare, but it's not like enough to make my amygdala go off either. Whenever I'm, when I'm at a gas station in Florida, I'll just say that my hackles are raised slightly higher than when I was in a gas station in most of Ohio, from a safety sense perspective, because you never know what you're going to get down here. And so I when I finally caught his eye and he was staring at me, he's like, did you just say that bi-monthly? And it wasn't venomous. It wasn't threatening. It was a mix of confusion and incredulity. And I'm on the phone, right, on an AirPod, and I'm thinking like, maybe he doesn't know I'm on the phone. He's like, I'm sorry to interrupt your call. So I'm like, okay, well, he's on the phone. He's like, did you just say bi-monthly? I'm like, yeah, it's a hybrid. I don't drive very much, sir. And he's like, that is the most incredible thing that I've ever heard. And he walks away. I tried to explain to the person I was talking to on the phone what had just happened. I'm not sure how much of that he heard, but yeah. So I've got all that to say, I'm just checking my hybrid privilege, I guess. Maybe my hope is that this is the last car that I ever have to own that requires I go to gas stations regularly at all. But we'll see. A close follow-up. I love hybrids just because, soup to nuts, right? Like if you do the math on how much energy is exerted and how many special minerals and shit go into making a car, it's probably a lot. And if you're like me, and I've owned this thing for 3.5 years, and I think I have 13,000 to 14,000 miles on it. I gas it up maybe 7 to 8 times a year. So that's like, how many fill-ups, right? Is that really? And I'm all about longevity. My goal with every car is take real good care of it, keep it real simple, don't drive it too much, and then drive it into the goddamn ground. So my goal with every car is like, let's get 10 years out of this thing. And if I'm only filling it up like 7, 8 times a year, 10 years, 70, 80 fill-ups, like I am pretty confident that the input cost into producing the vehicle are way higher than the marginal savings that I would have had from going from gas to electric. In fact, I suspect that the input cost, especially from a rare earth mineral perspective, like that would have gone into a probably over provisioned too large kilowatt hour battery. All that to say, as the hero of my own story, I suspect that my decision to purchase a hybrid, given my driving style, was net better for the planet than had I gone out and bought a Tesla or another EV. So I love stories that result in me feeling good about myself. No opinion on the guy who interrupted me, except that I want to have that kind of courage someday at a gas station in Florida. And until I do, I'm going to keep driving gasoline powered vehicles because that's my new white whale. I'm going to go up to a stranger at a gas station in Florida, interrupt them on their phone call without wearing a bulletproof vest, and see how that goes for me. Someday. It's good to have goals. Other life things. So Becky has already departed for a pretty epic and awesome Japan trip. She's visiting some friends. She was a teacher in Japan, and in the JET program, which is the public-private partnership that's executed via like the Japanese embassies in a lot of English-speaking countries. The name of the program is the JET program, and it gives access, especially in rural Japan, to school children. I think it's elementary, middle, and high school, but I think it's more focused. Like probably the biggest focus is making sure that at the middle school level, kids get access to native English speaking like teaching assistants, so that they get more exposure to the language, given just how the outsized importance of learning English. It's a really cool program. It's got its issues. The people who administer it inside the country are not necessarily. The national curriculum isn't built around like cultural exchange and learning the language of English in a practical way. And they're doing their best, right? But like, there's a lot I think they could learn from people who live in English speaking countries. But anyway, so not a perfect program. We had a great experience living in Nara for a year. And in JET speak, the word they always use is predecessor. The teacher of the town that came before you is called your predecessor, which very quickly gets shorthanded to pred, which I don't love. I don't love how pred sounds. Yeah, my pred. So Becky's pred was a woman named Lindsay, and because the two of them are two peas in a pod, they're so similar. The biography, CV perspective, and also like where they've lived in life and people they know in common is just uncanny. That they'd wind up teaching at the same couple of middle schools. Becky's out with her pred and her pred's husband today in Japan. She's got a couple other friends she's hanging out with over there for a couple days, and I'm going to follow her. I'm going to follow her to Japan with a boombox over my head, standing outside her hotel room. Except because we're old now and it's hard to get sleep sometimes in a shared bed, especially in like a hot business hotel room. I was like, you know what? I'm going to land and then I'm going to get my own hotel. You have fun. I'll see you the next morning. So I'm going on another Japan trip. This is trip number 11 for me, if you count the 6-month and year-long stays as single trips. Yeah, I'm going to land. I'm going to try, because I'm home alone this week, I'm going to try to get to bed like 2 hours earlier than usual on Saturday and 2 hours earlier than that on Sunday, so that the 5 a.m. wake up isn't so bad on Monday. And then I'm going to get to the airport and try, because like a lot of the flights on the East Coast fly to Japan around noon. Gives them enough time to turn around a red eye on a large plane, which means like noon our time right now during daylight savings time there's a 13-hour change, so that works out to like 1 a.m. their time. So like if you can like get on the plane and kind of fall asleep first thing, you're in real good shape. So having done this particular flight out of DTW, out of Detroit in particular, over half a dozen times, I feel like this is the closest I'm ever going to get to marathon training, maybe. So I've got my head all figured out. I know, like, it's really helpful for me to fast while I'm on whatever the international flight is, because my stomach kind of will help my brain do a reset if I eat at the first preordained meal time once I land, which is one of the reasons why I would never, unless it were very cheap, unless it were like a pittance more money, which in the current economy is not true ever, to upgrade to business or first class. I don't get a lot of benefit out of that on international travel with like a long time lag, because then I'm just tempted to gorge on all the free liquor and wonderful food, or would feel like, oh, it's a shame that I'm telling the flight attendant, no, I'm not going to eat this meal, 8 times as they try to like, stuff your gourd. Yeah, so fasting helps me a lot with jet lag. Other things on my mind with the vis-a-vis the Japan trip is we're settled in enough to this house now that I've got not only do I have all the to-dos figured out, like what has to happen in this house every 6 weeks, or what has to happen when I like leave. You got the basic stuff, like just did the vacation hold on the thermostat. You got like, set up the mail hold on the USPS mailbox. It's also the other stuff, like, and living in Florida just seems like there's more, right? It's like, I got to tell the pool guy that I'm going to be out, or got to tell, or got to go and fill up the salt crystals in the water softener now, so that when Becky gets back, it's not at risk of running out before I get back. She's getting back first. I got to go get the Ring spotlight cams and recharge those batteries now. That's on today's list. Because I wasn't able to get the wired in ones, right? And they only last about a month or two. Just like the number of like checklist items. Oh, got to run vinegar through the HVAC system, because here in Florida, if you don't do that through the like, the valve, the drain, basically like the water drain from your HVAC unit, it's liable to get moldy. And if it gets moldy, then it's just like an artery clog. It'll get the water can back up. And when the water backs up, you have a bad time, which I have discovered the hard way in the past. Yeah, so I'm getting a lot of those sort of like house dad stuff out of the way. I feel I've shared a lot of embarrassing things into this microphone. It's a good thing nobody listens outside Argentina to this program. But rarely have I shared something that I feel deep shame about. And I am ashamed to say that I have had to downgrade my travel bag. I've been traveling in a 19-liter Tom Bin Synapse. Same one. I did buy a second one, so I kind of alternate between the two. The one to kind of be my local, hey, I'm going to, going to the gym, or I'm going out and working somewhere. So I have that like loadout ready to go. I've been traveling exclusively out of that 19-liter bag for at least 8 years, possibly as long as 10 years. And I've dialed in exactly what that loadout is, and I could tell you right off the top of my head, there are 4 Eagle Creek quarter cube sacks. 3 of the sacks are clothes and 1 is toiletries. Of the clothes, 2 are t-shirt, underwear, socks for like day clothes changes. 1 is same but for my workout clothes, which lately is a tank top. So my tan lines are different. That's a big change. That's the pace at which my loadout changes, is like, oh, whoa, tank top to run in instead of a jogging shirt. Once those are in, I've got like there's a pouch inside for my laptop. And I've got the frontmost pocket is just a small but mighty GAN charger, an Anchor charger that has a couple USB-Cs. One for my watch and one for my computer / phone, now that both are USB-C. And that's like everything else in the main bag. And that loadout right there, depending on the laptop, can be as little as like 6 pounds, which is delightful. It's a great way to live. It gives you still have plenty of space if you need to grab something else, throw something else in. But when you're going to Japan, especially if you're going to go for like me in a period of weeks, I'll be there a long time this time. You start, it's not that longer trips, in my opinion, the longer the trip, the less you should bring and the more you should be able to survive in the destination, especially if it's like as convenient a country to just buy shit as Japan. However, in this case, I'm traveling to a country where it's going to be experiencing the transition of the season from like should definitely be wearing like long pants to wearing shorts. So I'm going to throw a pair of, my signature Uniqlo khaki shorts in my bag, even as I say that, like they're Japanese, Old Navy shorts, basically. I could just buy more there. Maybe I should. I'm also, and now this is me beating around the bush. I'm also bringing my Apple Vision Pro. And the reason that I'm bringing it is it's not for sale in Japan yet. And I'm going to be going to Ruby Kaigi in Okinawa. And I thought it would be fun to bring it and show it off and do a little show and tell at the conference with a few friends. Hopefully not, like, I don't plan on doing the Casey Neistat video where he like, where I would don the headset and I'd walk around like RoboCop, because that might be literally intimidating and the sort of attention enthusiasm is not enthusiasm is not necessarily looked upon fondly in Japan. But I'm also simultaneously I'm not above it, so that might happen. So that was one reason. The other reason is like now that I've been programming using the Vision Pro for so long, I wouldn't want to be without it. Having that big 4K screen that's 130 inches in small quarters is so much more productive than craning my neck over a little 13-inch MacBook Air screen that I can't be without it if I'm going to get anything done, is my sense. I'm also I did a couple of interviews last year at the conference, probably going to take, we've got a DJI mic set. It's a really great product. If you just search DJI wireless mic, because they mostly do drones. For a company that doesn't do audio equipment as their main thing, it's an impressive little piece of kit. It comes in an attractive and durable charging case. There are 2 lav mics that as microphones, and then there's a transceiver, a receiver that sits in the middle. They all sit inside the case, and just like AirPods, and like perfectly machined cavities with electric contact sensors on either side at the bottom. And additionally, they've got little like boom mic things that twist onto the top of the mics if there's wind or anything like that. it charges via one USB-C cable, and then all the three main parts get charged. It's got adapters for USB-C and for Lightning inside the case, so you can swap between them. It's a very impressive product. It's got onboard recording on each of the mics as a backup, and then USB-C from each of those mics to your computer. So like if you're going to record, and all that's in a package that's, can't think of a comparable size. Like a few iPods stacked on top of each other, but more narrow. It's not big. I wanted to use like deck of cards as a standard unit of measure, but I would say it's 3.5 decks of cards of volume. So anyway, I'm gonna probably take that. I'm gonna take a fan because like Japanese hotels tend to not have a lot of like a good airflow, which I can't sleep very well without. I'm a hot sleeper. That I feel no shame about talking about night sweats. I'll talk about that all day. But as I add up this list, I've got a whole little basket right next to me of all of the things that are my must pack list. There's no way I could do that in the 19 liter with the Vision Pro in there too. So I downgraded to the 25 liter Tom Bin Synapse, which is just, it's, if you've ever taken a design and then just done a transform scale on it and just like dragged the little corner and then made it like 30% bigger. And then you're like, you eyeball it and you're like, yep, job's done, and ship it. And you realize like, you know what, like this pocket now, like something about the ratio is just off. That's how the 25 liter Synapse is. It's all of the same pockets, the same configuration. Everything's just like exactly that 20% bigger, 30% bigger. But the magic is lost. And I look, when I'm wearing the little one, people are like, oh, look at that full-size man carrying the cute backpack. When I carry the big one, I look more like an IT guy carrying a bigger than you'd take to school backpack. And as we all know, I'm famously very concerned about how I look. But the Vision Pro is worth it. At least on this trip, at least I think so. I don't hope to be on the computer too many hours a day, but you know, going to be in place for a period of multiple weeks, and you get long flights on either end. It'd be nice to have for entertaining myself. Another thing that keeps coming up is because Kaigi is a place, this Ruby conference in Japan, a lot of foreigners come. They want a lot of foreigners to come. If you're a foreigner, you're probably a foreigner. If you're not from Japan, if you're a foreigner, just know Ruby Kaigi really wants you to come. And you probably missed the window for this year, unless you're going to book a flight tomorrow. But they pay for professional translators to translate everything in English. Half the talks are already presented in English. They have a special, like for all of their after parties and things, like there's often like a special line item of like reserved tickets just for foreigners who might not know how to sign up until later on. Things like that. Like they're very conscientious. Everything's available in English. And as a result, as being kind of a bridge person, you know, Aaron and I, because we speak Japanese, we're very often asked a lot of questions from our fellow foreigners, from our fellow gaijins. By the way, gaijin, here, to make the point, we get asked a lot of questions about like cultural stuff, language, you name it, how to book a hotel, that kind of thing. And every now and then, so gaijin is means outsider. And it's used pejoratively frequently to talk about foreigners. And so in polite company, if you're not kind of like being jokey or sardonic, gaikokujin, as in outside country person, so foreign country individual, is the polite term, the appropriate term. You're very unlikely, if a Japanese person calls you a gaijin, you probably fucked up. is my professional advice. There are two words in Japanese that Becky and I talk about a lot that are just funny because they're so unlike the words we would use in the same context. So I wanted to share those with you because they came up when I was talking to somebody about going to kaigi and speaking. The first situation that we're often in is you're doing something hard. Like, okay, so you imagine you're studying for an exam, or work has you working extra hours, or you're in a period of life where something is like more challenging than usual, and you're doing a new thing and it's big and scary, and it might go both ways, good or bad, but it's going to require a lot of effort. In English, in American English, most of my reactions are like expressions of pity. Oh man, I'm really sorry you got to work so much. That sucks, right? Or oh man, like, well, I hope that goes well for you, or like, oh man, I'll be pulling for you. Like, all my fingers crossed that goes well, which are, come to think of it, like not especially motivating. They kind of like, the framing there is, I have to work more and that is bad. And I think in general, that is a very Western notion, that having to try hard is not a desirable state to be in, especially inside of the capitalist world we live in, where labor often gets short shrift, and so it makes good sense to kind of push back. In Japan, in the same context, the set phrase, the set word, is almost uniformly ganbatte. Ganbatte kudasai. Ganbatte, ganbarimasu. Ganbaru. Ganbaro is another thing you might say informally. Like, let's try hard. Ganbarimasu means to strive, to try, to do the thing, to work hard. Let's put in the effort. Like, that's the vibe. So ganbatte is a shorthand for, hey, go work hard, right? Oh man, work's really hard right now. It's like, yeah, you go work the shit out of that work. And with my American brain, it took me like over 10 years of knowing this intellectually, but still feeling like, oh man, like my friend Hatsumi, she's got to work extra hours because for Golden Week, she works at a Japanese confectioner, like mail order confection company. And so like they've got to send candies, like the orders are higher than usual. So she's got to work a lot of overtime. And so I'll reply, ganbatte. And maybe soften it with like, and next week we'll get to hang out. I'll see you. Just one more week. And I've asked her this actually a couple of years ago. I was like, when I say, in response to you complaining about work being hard, when I say go work hard effectively, what do you feel inside of your head? And her explanation, this is in Japanese and I might have missed some nuance, was to feel encouraged and invigorated, and to feel grateful that I cared. In English, if I was about to do a hard thing and somebody told me, yeah, you go strive, you go not hang in there, but like go climb that mountain, is sort of the difference. I wouldn't know what to do with myself, but as I'm having this discussion with myself, I kind of like, I've come around on this. I think if somebody's got a hard thing to do and you're just an innocent bystander and they're just venting or explaining it, why not cheer them on? It's not like you have control over their situation. I think especially in the discourse in America lately, I feel like a lot of especially privileged people feel so bent out of shape about the systemic problems facing the world that anything that isn't suffering feels like privilege. And so then we should be constantly explaining it away or feeling ashamed about it. And as a result, when something's hard to do, it's another opportunity to be like, to exhibit performative misery. I gotta do this. And then, the appropriate response in certain company is like, oh yeah, like life sucks or capitalism sucks or whatever sucks. It's just like this negative valence is so dominant and has been so dominant for the entirety of my adult life that I can kind of get behind like, yeah, Rock on. And you could just imagine at a societal level, if that was like everyone's default reaction to other person that you know has to do hard thing, is like, instead of just demoralize them with thing outside your control, you cheered them on. That would be pretty neat. I can get behind that. The other word that comes up frequently is otsukare. Otsukare sama deshita. Otsukare is so it's an honorific. The O, whenever you hear O in front of a Japanese thing, it usually means like it's made to be extra polite, like you're talking honorably to somebody to show them deference. It's an honorific form of tsukaremasu, tsukareru, the verb to have exerted oneself, and often used like tsukareta means I'm tired. I have exerted myself. Otsukare is an honorific way to acknowledge the exertion of someone else. And so the situation, right? Like imagine you're in a situation and you just completed a long day at work, or you just gave your presentation, you gave a speech, or you finished the project and you're at a drink up afterwards with colleagues. Depending on the formality of the relationship, people will say, hey, otsukare. Instead of congratulations, instead of great job, instead of wow, that's so awesome. Or instead of trying to find a thing that they liked and a thing that they can passive aggressively provide feedback for improvement for next time. That also does happen, but in a different context. You just say, you've honorably tuckered yourself out there, haven't you? And this, again, is one of these things that at first glance, you're like, what? Like, shouldn't you be celebrating in the success of somebody else? Shouldn't you be telling them what a great job they did and focusing on the merits instead of just, anyone can exert themselves. But then again, now that you think about it, I actually kind of like the fact that otsukare is a judgment-free way to see somebody without, pulling rank on them and establishing this like vertical relationship where I'm putting myself in a position of judgment over the quality of your work, whether I'm qualified to, or that's appropriate, or you've consented to that or not. And I'm telling you that it's really good. That can be just as unhelpful to somebody as getting unsolicited negative critical feedback. And a lot of times people have to do hard things that aren't particularly like, there's nothing to celebrate. A lot of things in life are just fucking hard. Yeah, I went and worked at a retail job for 8 hours and I came home, or I went out for a beer, and you're telling me, congratulations on another day of drudgery, right? That doesn't make any sense. But to have a set phrase to indicate like that you see somebody's efforts and that they matter. Whether you're in a job that pays really well or pays really poorly, apart from one's salary, we rarely get that. We rarely get that unless we ask for it, in the West. So those are the 2 words of the day. I'm looking forward to traveling, especially spending some time solo, because I'll get lots of language practice. We're just blowing through life updates. I should probably move on. One thing that an interesting thing that I do is I will often email people out of the blue. Like if I see somebody gave an interview and that was a really good interview. I don't care if they're a celebrity. I don't care if they are somebody I've looked up to. I don't care if they're an internet personality. Especially, I've always been this way though. Like I think that your mother might have said, oh, well, you could, send an email, or you could just tell somebody something, but like, wouldn't it be nicer to write a letter and mail it to them or send a card or something? Right. Which I've never identified with at all. Like mail is a violence that I don't want in my life. but as we've become more and more extemporaneous and ephemeral in how we communicate on the internet, increasingly, how many pieces of feedback does somebody who's got a lot of followers get just on social media? Number of likes, number of comments saying, oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And like it becomes, and as somebody who has at various points had a very large social media presence, it becomes a background radiation that means nothing to you, that doesn't really stand out. And you might remember particular faces. I'm not saying that like the people given the attaboys and stuff aren't, that isn't valued. It is. But if you go to the trouble of like finding the person's email address and then emailing them, it often throws people off, even people who you might think are like a big deal. And if you send an email that indicates like, wow, I understand what you're about and I appreciate you. It's not uncommon for me to suddenly like, whoa, I'm friends with this person now and get a reply going. So I'd encourage you to do that. I had one actually this week, now that I'm thinking about it, a beautiful email from they didn't authorize me to talk about this on the podcast. It was an email not podcast related, so I won't name them. But they binge watched all of Searles After Dark at a time in their life where that was very helpful. Searles After Dark was a 10-part YouTube series I did where it was me writing a Rails app when I was pretty rusty, always with a cocktail, always at the end of a long day, and my brain wasn't working very well. And I would get lost. In every episode, I would get just hopelessly lost. And then every episode, as if by magic, right as I was about to wind down, it was roughly an hour per episode, I'd figure it out just enough to get to the next thing. And somebody wrote in and sent a long email about like where they're at in their life, their story to the date, like that they'd followed Test Double and myself for a long time, but in particular that the Searles After Dark series made a real meaningful impact at a particular moment. And that was really special because I don't often get that kind of, I get feedback like that was really good. I don't get feedback like this is the impact that this had. I have to infer that stuff. So that was really cool. And I sent such an email to, such an email. It was like a sentence long at first to Adam Lizagore. He is the founder of Sandwich. Sandwich makes commercials on the internet. And I sent him an email because I wanted to tell him, hey, your television app that you just launched, and I'd mentioned this on a previous version of the show, is really great. You should be really proud of it. This is how I'm using it. And we got into an email back and forth, and he's a fascinating person, really, really thoughtful individual, just as much as you might imagine if you've seen any of his excellent commercials. If you search for Sandwich commercial, you might not find it right away. It's, Sandwich.vision is the name of the vision-focused vision apps that they're making. Sandwich Video, there we go. Sandwich.co, there we go. It's actually a really nice little landing page. So they make lots of great commercials. So yeah, we've gotten a fun back and forth. And in the course of our, because he's so excited about the Vision Pro, in the course of our correspondence, we talked about a lot of that stuff. One thing in particular was he mentioned that like there's this meme called like the open face system where people are taking off the light shield from the Vision Pro and changing or modifying the strap such that there is a little bumper or a halo in the front of your head so that like even without the light shield they're pressing against the front of your face. It's just magnetically attached. It's not like some big operation. It does a couple things. Like as long as you have something to hold the unit on your head in the right position. If you take off the light shield, then suddenly the device goes from having a very narrow field of view, like ski goggles, to you can see the periphery. It's less hot because you've got airflow going in from the right and left of your face, it's less uncomfortable because you don't have something pressing up against the front of your face. And so the one time I had to put the light shield back on, I came downstairs and Becky's like, oh, you've been on your Vision Pro too long. But but when the light shield's not on the face, it doesn't just leave a little silly red circle. And it's closer to the vision of like what Apple wants this thing to be. You know, it feels like more like glasses. They're just kind of circular goggles. Now, it's very precarious, right? It's easy to get your eyes too close or too far. And sometimes it's fiddly, you know, to make sure that you're dialed in and you're the right distance. If you're in a really bright environment, the screen itself can look a little washed out, but like testament to how fucking bright those little micro OLEDs are on the Vision Pro. They're so bright that even then it's very, very usable. So in our email exchange, he encouraged me to put the light shield, take off the light shield, go open face, if you will. And so I did that. And I highly recommend you try it. If you follow my advice and you use a Bobo M2 Plus strap with like some little adapters, you can literally just take it off. And I was like, oh, wow, this is wonderful. So we because his app supports spatial personas, we agreed like, oh, let's do a little like spatial persona FaceTime. And so we did that last night. But a couple notes. One, when you go full open system, you get more schmutz on the lenses, right? Because you don't have the light seal there to kind of passively block rogue fingerprints and face grease and stuff. Like every now and then, you would want to polish off the lenses that you're staring into. Now, like I'm not normally super precious with the glass on Apple's products, but knowing that these lenses are effectively magnifying glasses has me shook. And I don't, Apple never says they say don't use any alcohols, don't use any solvents, because all of their glass is always treated with coatings, either like on the phone, like the oleophobic water resistant coating could get cut by solvents, even alcohol. So I knew I wasn't going to use a solvent to wipe it off. But at the same time, so I'll have all these alcohol wipes. I'm not going to use those on the lenses. At the same time, I've got all these microfiber cloths, but a lot of them are just like little tchotchkes that get thrown in bags, and I have no idea of the provenance of the microfiber. Where was this microfiber farmed? Is this going to just leave even more little like cloth particulates on top of the lens than it's going to wipe off schmutz? And so for the job, I really wanted to use the fancy polishing cloth that comes with the Vision Pro. It says Vision Pro Red on it. And I lost it. I lost it. I couldn't find it. I went everywhere. I went through all my boxes. I went through, the Vision Pro comes with a lot of bullshit. And I was like, okay, so maybe I left it in the product box because it's the kind of thing I would do, like the Apple stickers that you don't use. So I went and I got the product box up, and it was up at the top of one of our guest closets. And of course, while I'm pulling it down, another box, the last version's Sonos Move 2, that box, which is much heavier than it needs to be. The corner of that box hit me square in the fucking like upper right corner of my forehead. And it didn't draw blood, but it still kind of hurts. So if I'm incoherent today, I choose to blame that. Got the box down, wasn't in the box. So I finally found the polishing cloth, and then as soon as I put the polishing cloth over the lenses, very proud of myself, I was like, shit, I don't know how Apple would have me polish this. I looked for a YouTube. I was like, what's the right way to polish this thing? Do you start with like, is it all circular? Do you start rubbing it harder and then it becomes finer? Like I'm finding that like basic glass care is not one of the things that they taught me in home ec. So I don't know. I rubbed on it and I prayed a little prayer, and then I put it back on and it seemed marginally better. before talking to Adam on Vision Pro, he got held up doing some edits, I guess, by 30 minutes or so. And I was like, well, this is 8 p.m. my time. I'm not going to like try to get some work done right now. So I'm on my Vision Pro, and I don't have my laptop with me, so I don't want to do anything that involves typing. So I decided, like, I'll just like, I had not watched a normal ass 3D movie on the platform before. I'd done the immersive videos, but none of the videos or movies I wanted to watch were available in 3D. So I opened the Apple TV app and I saw like, oh, look, they licensed some of the Paramount Plus or Paramount catalog of films into Apple TV Plus, and Apple TV Plus is a really good player in the Vision Pro. So I loaded up Star Trek Into Darkness, the second J.J. Abrams Star Trek film. It was mostly panned, but I quite enjoyed it. I really liked what they were going for. I wish that there were 10 of those fucking movies. It's a bummer we only got 3. Come at me. I want to live in a land with so much fucking lens flare. You don't even know. So Star Trek Into Darkness, loaded up. I want to play in 3D mode, right? So I put it in 3D mode. And if you're watching 3D in a window, the depth effect is not clear. Like it's not like fuzzy like the personas, the non-spatial personas are, where there's like, you're kind of like looking through a shallow window with some blur around the edges. It's more like a window, just a normal ass window with pop-up characters kind of sticking out a little bit, but only like usually in the center of the frame or wherever they want you to focus, right? So the plane that you're looking at, the plane of the window is the background, the backmost plane in the film. And anything else pops up in the foreground, almost like a little, like if you're doing, like Paper Mario, you know, like a, which is itself like, you know, like a paper mache. That's the wrong word, right? Yeah, no, it's like a little cut, like cutouts, right? Like animations. Yeah. You cut out like a little character and you put them on. You can tell that there's like, yes, this little thin layer of paper is higher than the other thin layers of paper. And that's fine for what it is. That was a choice. It makes sense because the depth effect in a lot of 3D films aren't that pronounced, so it wouldn't make sense to make it look too deep, the window it is. However, 3D films that were like blockbuster movies, I know they still make them, but they had their moment. They were developed for viewing in film with glasses on. And when you shoot a 3D movie, you're usually shooting on film 2-dimensionally. Very, very few are shot with a rig that's actually like, filmed in 3D at proper stereoscopic, eye distance apart. And most of the time what you're seeing is post-production. This is post-production like of a 2D film, and you just got to make it pop out. Okay. And the way that they do that is literally somebody, whether it's a computer editing program or like somebody manually kind of shaping it, will determine on each frame of the movie, like what are, if I've got 3 or 4 levels of layering that I can show people on the 3D version of the film, I need to cut out all of those layers and then order the layers. And maybe to a certain extent determine like for that frame, the level of depthitude of those things, so you got something sticking out really dramatically, that's going to be a more dramatic effect, right? In terms of like separating the images between the left and the right eye. Whereas something where those are very close, you're not going to have nearly as dramatic, maybe just a very subtle effect. And of course, this happens when it's done in post, it happens completely separately from the focus blur of the camera. And so the camera has its own focus going on. So very often you'll have something in the foreground that's out of focus, but they've still nevertheless cut out the shape. And so there's this thing in the foreground that's like very blurry. And you're like, what exactly is that? Now, when you're in the theater and you're wearing the glasses, my theory is that the glasses, because they're polarized, one in each direction, so that each eye only receives the light that it's supposed to, you're basically cutting the brightness of an already too dim, in most cases, projector in half. So it's pretty dim. It's also the projection quality at most, US theaters is not fantastic, even if it's digital. It's not as good as my home theater. I know that much. And it's definitely not as good as a Vision Pro with two 4K lenses, slightly higher than 4K screens that are like, logically been pulled straight up to your face. And so there's some natural blurring as a result, right? Like you're not seeing every single pixel of the film when you're in a 3D movie. And so they produce them to be pixel perfect. However, because in practice, you're going to see them in a blurry, dimmer setting. So like the fact that you're looking at a whole bunch of paper cutouts of like, oh, this woman was in the foreground, so we're going to show her hair here and as being in front of the other character who's going to be in the background. And of course, focus will just sort of shift randomly between the two as they speak. Yeah, that's shallow depth of focus is another Abramsism, I guess. So maybe this is an especially bad film to watch in 3D. But because the Vision Pro is so fucking sharp, I was watching the film and I was like, I am looking at like just paper cutouts as if like an episode of South Park, and I can see exactly where those lines are. And between that and being able to see the focus blur so accurately against these really, really sharp little cutouts, that makes it look like a little diorama. One, I'll keep watching it this way just to have said I did. Two, I can kind of understand now how like every time seeing a 3D movie in a theater, I feel like I've lost the plot and forgot what happened halfway through within an hour. Like this feels like why. And three, I forgot three. I did forget three. This is why you don't count out confidently how many numbers in a numbered list you're going to have. Yeah. Anyway, 3D overrated. Oh, right. Well, maybe this was 3. Number 3. 3. It reminds me of how classic video games of like the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis era were designed for CRT style televisions, where they would make all of these pixel perfect 240 by 180 little like on graph paper, design the pixels of every sprite, and those would layer on very sharply. But knowing how CRTs work, just down to like, some game developers got into the science of like on particular types of CRTs, they would master the game to dial in like, oh, I know on what is it, like the phosphorus kind, like these lines will blur in just the right way as to make it look like this sprite is flickering in the foreground, right? Like it'll look like water in front of the character. So that level of design like was really, really cool. But as soon as now we live in a post CRT existence and everything is typically like some variant of an LCD. Now all of that blur that used to be part of the art is completely lost because it's all too damn sharp. So if you play like a retro game now, and if you've been doing it long enough, because we're 20 plus years into this LCD dominated lifestyle, you might find that you're used to it. But the lack of that blur means that a lot of the artistic quality is lost, and it actually like not just softness. We're not talking about like a sepia toned existence. Like it's genuinely not what the artists had intended. To see the pixel art so pixely, I guess, because that's not how CRTs would render them. That's how I felt watching a 3D film in the Apple Vision Pro, and I would say that is a problem for Apple because they need content if they're going like a pipeline of content, and I think they can make their own content. I hope that they make good content, but if they're making 3D movie style content, like subtly 3D shows, I think that the Monsters one, the Monarch, I think that's 3D. Maybe I should watch a couple episodes. I really hope that they do a better job of not just doing this shit in post, but actually filming stuff in 3D. Because you're going to be able to tell the difference. So Vision Pro update. Next up, in follow-up, where we are currently residing, Anyway, to wrap that comment about Adam up, Adam and I had a lovely chat. We did get on the phone. We talked a bunch of, just about Vision Pro ephemera and our experiences, and played with the television app. And of course, I found an extremely novel bug that I think is in the operating system of buttons just rendering impossibly small, like 1 to 2 pixels wide buttons. I think having to do with like how AR snapping is working. But had a great conversation. It made me think a little bit about how, like, what am I looking forward to at WWDC? And boy, I hope that Apple does a couple big thematic shifts with future versions of Vision OS. I've mentioned before, I want to build a translation app that like can see what you see, can get access to the pass-through video so that it can interpret text that's on screens or on a book or whatever, and then interact with that text by like, helping define things and basically being like a little buddy, like a little side panel that pops up and observes your world, which of course Apple doesn't allow at all because Meta would just turn that into ad tracking. I hope that they find a way to allow developers to actually derive some kind of meaning from the space that the human is really in. And I'm skeptical that they will, because it would be a pretty big departure where they've come from so far. But I was telling Adam this last night, like the more that I use this, the more it's just like this platform is limited into throwing iPad windows all around you in space. And and here they've built this spatial pass through that is so sophisticated. But it's just a parlor trick. It's like where all that energy went into. Their purpose was not to make a device that integrates you with the world around you. Their purpose was to trick you to think that you're not wearing a VR headset because they wish it wasn't. And that's a very different design goal, because they did pull that off. They pulled that off where you put it on and sometimes like I'm wearing it and I'll put my hand to my face, like I'm going to touch my forehead and realize, oh yeah, my hand just disappeared when it got to be half an inch away because the cameras can't see the hand anymore. It's very, really cool. It's a very cool parlor trick. Much more difficult would be do that and also make that world that the cameras are successfully creating the perfect parabolic trigonometry to not look like you're looking through a fisheye lens. Make that world have some kind of meaning to the software that is in front of you digitally. Right now, you get operating system level stuff like when you drag a window, it'll cast a shadow, which is very impressive. It's detecting how many lumens are in the space, and it's like, figuring out the light sources in the area, and it's casting a very appropriate shadow, like on a table or whatever. But the application tier gets none of that. And so here they've built a very realistic rendering of your reality. And with ARKit, you can see that like it's snapping to planes. It's detecting the planes of the walls and the floors and ceiling. But so little of that, almost none, is exposed to the application developers. That's like, you could be in a prison cell, or you could be on the top of the Eiffel Tower, and this thing would have no awareness and no ability to modify how software shows up. Location API is limited to what it always is with like, the GPS. If there is a GPS on the thing, I don't think there is. It's limited to, I guess, the Skyhook style Wi-Fi location finding. It's just that's where I think this has to go, or else software is going to be so super uninteresting. Why would you go beyond just porting your iPad app to have like the nicer looking controls? There's not a lot else to do. So that's been a pretty big disappointment. It's got me thinking about like maybe what I need to build from a language app perspective is more of a multi-platform Apple Play instead of Vision Pro focused. Because I wanted to get in on the ground early with that, but I don't know what there is to get in on, because I don't even know a single feature that is like of the first 20 that I'd identified that's even really possible with this SDK, which I think is a pretty big indictment of the SDK. You should be able to handle the meta case through policy, through something, without completely neutering your whole platform's reason for existence. So yeah, that's one big piece. The other thing I'm really hoping for is right now there's not a lot of ways for apps to interact with each other. Like, I mentioned this to Adam. He mentioned, well, you can drag drop from like, my Mid-Journey generated image in Discord, and you can drag drop that into Slack. And that's true. And those are both iPad apps. That's true. And that is a metaphor that exists in the iPad. But when you're the iPad and the iPhone are basically, you're looking at one window at a time, and the Mac, you're looking at lots of windows at a time, but in a legacy sense where there's not any sort of semantic relationship between those windows. They also kind of exist in isolation and unawareness of other apps going on. They're just on top of something or behind something. With Vision Pro, like you can arrange your whole command center, and you can have like, I'm going to have my music above me. I'm going to have my video editor in front of me. I'm going to have like a composition tool to my left, and I'm going to have, some maybe it's Discord with Midjourney on the right. And I want to be able to build into each and every one of these apps, like the functionality that lets these things know about each other's existence. Positionally, this is the file that's open, like give more inter-app APIs, which the iPhone and the iPad have never really needed. They had like the universal link protocol for linking out between apps, but that's because every app is mostly a single page experience. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what these APIs are, but like I remember like iOS 5, iOS 4, where one of the tentpoles was like all of this interop between apps. It was the one where Scott Forstall is talking about like background refresh for the first time, like thinking bigger than just the app existing as whatever's on the screen while you're looking at it. It introduced stuff like the maps navigation for third-party apps, the call integration for stuff like Skype. That is the kind of, those are the classifications of API, system level API, that should be available to application developers. That is not currently, because we haven't figured out what are the interactions between the apps in Vision Pro that make sense. And because development has been so anemic so far, I don't think Apple has the input to even know what that would be. And so that, like they shipped the Vision Pro in part to get the feedback, to get the cycles, to know like, what's this thing all about? Where is it valuable? And I feel like a huge part of it, its potential value, is apps that, when placed near each other in a shared space, the system should be able to identify like the workflow is happening, right? The user is clearly like some kind of meaning exists here. What does it mean to improve the potential for a workflow for different classifications of applications? What would app developers want? What could we do to make it more seamless? And that would be a handy thing to have in a system that has very poor, no keyboard support, basically, very bad keyboard, and which is going to increasingly become like local AI empowered with like an agent. Like that agent would want the same things. Hey, take this from this app over here and put it over here, kind of shit, that I don't think there's currently an avenue for. So maybe, this is not going to happen this year, but that seems like long-term, what's going to be necessary for this to be more than just an interesting piece of display technology. I've got a couple other follow-up items, but we're kind of, I'm taking my sweet ass time today, to put it politely. So maybe I should just move on. The TikTok ban passed. That's more follow-up. Stay tuned. I don't really care. I hope TikTok is banned only because I couldn't get at Searles. And so I don't want it to exist for that reason alone. And anything else I say you shouldn't trust, because everything else that I think about TikTok is all rationalization based on the fact that I couldn't get my six character handle. I'm gonna skip these other follow-ups. It's just not worth it. Your time is too valuable. So I suppose it's time to move on and talk about today's pun. The pun provided by our friend Aaron Patterson. also known as Tender Love. I told him I was going to talk about a map-related thing. He sent me one of the longer ones. It's still in the invisible ink. I'm gonna swipe it away. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a mapping feature. He said, I brought this type of feature up with a project manager back in the day, but they told me to just put a pin in it. I share these prompts with him as to provide, to dress the table, set the table, like I give him a theme to work with. I didn't mean for it to be like a call and response. Oh, wow. And as I was scrolling, I only use the magic trackpad during recording because it's quieter than my mouse. The battery died. And so now it's just permanently on the corner. Oh, hold on. Gotta go and plug it in, and hopefully that'll wake it up. It did. Success. I brought this type of feature up with a project manager back in the day, but they told me to just put a pin in it. Yeah, so that's a little bit more of a dialogue with my prompt than I intended, and that might be on me and how I communicated. Version 11, April 26th. I keep forgetting what day it is. I'm gonna rate this poorly because it's such a simple pun. We put pins in maps. I get it. There's just not a lot there. And he's given us such multi-dimensional puns in recent weeks. Oh boy. I think this is, he's had a streak of several of the top rated ones, but I think this one is, I'm going to say this is better than version 2's. I am excited about Apple Vision Pro. I heard spatial computing will be out of this world. Spatial with a C. But not as good as my feet really hurt from walking, so I've decided to switch to meters, which I think is underrated at number 8. So this is our new number 9 pun, version 11. Drag and drop with my kind of busted trackpad over here. All right. Number 9, version 11. I brought this type of feature up with a project manager back in the day, but they told me to just put a pin in it. I feel like now I need to add another column to the spreadsheet that's like context. He was replying to a thing about a map feature. It's a good thing Aaron doesn't listen to the show, or he'd be here to defend himself. All right. Aaron, unlike me, doesn't just walk around the house all day listening to podcasts. He is present as he hangs out with his wife Epi and his cat. All right, news. That's the thing that we do after the pun. I'm gonna say Otsukare-sama to Aaron. You have exerted yourself, as opposed to put myself in a position of judgment over you. All right, so news. We got some news to talk about. Somebody on Mastodon, in response to the Accidental Tech podcast continuing to repeat, they're common complaints of that Apple computers come with too little RAM, right? So like 8 gigabytes of RAM is what an Apple base consumer configuration of that all of their computers have come with for a long time. I didn't quite realize how long. You can argue whether 8 gigs is enough or not for a normal consumer. I haven't been using one as a daily driver for a few years now, but I would often buy the entry level. Like my M1 MacBook Air, I think, had the 8 gigs, and it was totally fine, and it didn't swap very much. It's hard to tell when you run out of RAM and it has to start using virtual memory. I think the SSDs are indeed fast. So like when it does have to page out to virtual memory, it is less jarring an experience than anyone who like me grew up with a physical hard disk that would have to grind away. It was like a showstopper level of slow. But, you know, I think in combination, the fact that I don't use any Electron apps other than VS Code, which is by far the biggest battery hog on my system. I don't use Chrome. I said battery hog, but I also boiled in there too. I mean, a memory hog. So I think if you use Chrome, and you're a person who hoards tabs, I could imagine you feeling like 8 gigs would not be nearly enough. In a practical sense, like you might observe things that tell you it's not enough, but I think in a vibe sense, people are just like, hey, it's been 8 gigs for too long. So somebody on Mastodon, it's all the same shit now. Somebody on Mastodon posted a screenshot of a logarithmic scale graph of RAM step changes in Apple computers over time. And then like from 2012 onward, it was just pegged at the same 8 gigabytes. It has not changed in over a decade. In fact, the baseline level of RAM has not increased since Tim Cook became CEO, which says something about his priorities to try to get the average sale price of each computer up by making, you know, upgrades almost mandatory. At least that's the thinking among the Apple-rati. But the funny thing about it is that all of this LLM stuff, the AI has a capacious? No, capacious means high capacity. A voracious, yeah, as in full of vorace, has a voracious need for memory. So AI related stuff needs a lot, like to have a context of what it's analyzing. It needs a lot of memory to pass through to those GPU style neural engine compute chips. And I suspect Apple is innovating a lot. I mean, there's been a couple papers about like, what was it called? LLM in a flash, about like the low memory environments and how to do AI well on device. So clearly, like, this is a bed that they've made for themselves. But coincident with all this, the rumors are suggesting that the iPhone 16 lineup will all 4 models will have 8 gigabytes of RAM. Currently, the 15 Pro has 8 gigabytes of RAM, and it never crossed my mind, or I never connected the dots that the RAM on the phones keeps going up to the point now where I have the same RAM on my phone as I do on like an entry level, potentially underpowered, under-memoried, much more expensive. You know, you could get what's the most expensive base model Mac? You could probably find a way to configure an iMac to like $1,500 without getting any more RAM. Probably higher, much higher, right? Because if you upgrade the storage without the RAM, then you could probably find a way to spend $3,000 on a build to order Mac and still keep the base level of RAM. So anyway, I share that because it's just an amazing fact that in the Tim Cook era, the base level RAM configuration hasn't increased. I was flummoxed. I will share that link so that you too can flummox. I don't know that I have anything more to say about that other than I like RAM and we should have more of it. I think in general with Apple, if you pay premium level prices, you should get premium level experiences. And in general, you do. But I haven't seen a lot of evidence that 8 gigabytes results in non-premium level experiences for the people who use the entry level products. So that's why I find like this is a little bit of it's one of my least favorite things that people do, and people in tech seem to do this a lot. A lot of people who strive or purport to be capital A allies of diversity will seemingly take offense on behalf of others, not in the room, not present, speak for them, and then use it as a cudgel to actually other people for like basically just to police, language or how people comport themselves and say, oh, well, you shouldn't do it this way because some other person might be might interpret it that way. And that is, you know, not inclusive or whatever. And to a certain extent, that is like incredibly necessary. But like what I'm talking about in particular is the guy who gets off on seeing perceived potential slights in a third party who's not present, and then derailing conversation and the energy in the room to score points on an imaginary scoreboard. I don't know if you've seen this. I've seen a lot of this. Because a lot of people in tech, I think they like to be the know-it-all. It's a way to feel some amount of power and authority. And a lot of people in tech have just become, this is how I get from RAM to beefs about DEI in tech, I guess. They just like they want to be able to start and win a bunch of arguments about minutia of like, oh, well, technically, I realize you just said the arguments of this method, but just so you know, it's actually the parameter list in the method definition. It's only referred to as arguments when you invoke the method. Like, yes, you chuckle fuck. That is technically true. But the fact that you just said it wasted this much oxygen and my train of thought and like whatever's going on in the room, and we're all thinking that you're a shithead, is like a conversation that I've been in so many dozens of times that when I started in around 2016, 2017, to see the exact same dynamic with the exact same dudes who suddenly put on a hat that said ally, just so that they could score points, this time with some ladies, right? That valence was also not lost on me, that there was a higher index of single guys, but single for a reason guys, who seemed extra eager to flash their ally cred by starting arguments. For fuck's sake. Anyway, they also do that about RAM, I guess, is my point, and say, oh, you know, Apple should be ashamed of having only 8 gigabytes of RAM on this model of computer that is so cheap that I would never buy it. How dare they? And the people who do buy those computers basically don't use them, and when they do, it's just like mail and Gmail. Photos. If they're going to upgrade anything on these computers, like any device, it should be storage probably, because people take a lot of photos. And of course, if Tim Cook should be ashamed of anything, it's that 5 gigabyte iCloud storage by default. You know, I realize they're trying to get people's credit card numbers and get services and stuff. But the fact of the matter is, if you work for Apple in customer support and somebody didn't have a backup, or they didn't have iCloud photos turned on because they were at the 5 gigabyte, you know, above that threshold, and it just turns off until you give them money like that. When Apple talks about changing the world, figure out a way in your 40% profit margins to just let people back up their phones and their photos of their kids and stuff. That doesn't require them to get on the Apple One treadmill. You know, if privacy is a human right, I think having photos of your kids not disappear when your phone gets broken is more important, demonstrably more important to most people, most consumers, than privacy, because they give away their privacy for a sandwich. but you know, as much as we talk about having a fire in the house, I guess we don't talk about this that often, but you know, the proverbial, oh, well, if your house was burning down, what's the one thing you would go and grab? And people used to say the photo album, because that's priceless. You can't get it back again. Now, no one prints photos, you know, to a certain number of significant digits, like approximately 0 people still have photos. It seems to me that, like, if you're thinking about like this company existing for the good of humanity, like that's the thing that's worth complaining about, because the harm there is so obvious. But like trying to get into the weeds in terms of like how memory is wired in an increasingly complicated unified memory architecture that like can't really report clearly on what memory is in use and what's not and how it swaps. I don't know. Weird hill to die on, I would say. Other thing in the news, this is in continuing with the theme of news that's really just tweets. So the first one was a Mastodon toot. The second one is a tweet from Peter Cooper. Peter Cooper does the JavaScript Weekly and Ruby Weekly and other insert the fill in the blank weekly newsletters. I've been very fortunate to be featured in Ruby Weekly on a number of times. Peter has been a great supporter of my work over the years and connecting new audiences with the stuff that I'm doing. I got to meet him in person, I think just once at Fluent Conf, a conference that O'Reilly used to do in the before times, which Peter co-organized. He did a tweet, and this is following the news, the actual news story, which I don't care about right now for the context of this conversation. The actual story is IBM is buying HashiCorp. And HashiCorp is they do a lot of work in a lot of languages, but like it is sort of kind of in a sense a Ruby founder company because they came out of the Ruby ecosystem for sure. So Peter says, I wonder, are there more Ruby developers who are billionaires than for any other programming language? Think founders of GitHub, HashiCorp, and Shopify at least. This is a great troll. This is a masterclass troll. And now I hope, because it's a Twitter link, I didn't click it. I just read it off of the iMessage of somebody sent. I think Mike sent it to me. Mike McQuaid of Homebrew fame. And I wish I thought about this. Thought of this troll. It's so great. If only old school Twitter still existed and like there was a diverse enough group of people and there's enough engagement to really see this thing fly far. Because it's probably true. It's probably true that Ruby has created more billionaires. And I got thinking about it and I was like, well, not only have they created more billionaires, but if you think of like just how the inflation of exits, right? Like, what was it? YouTube was bought for like $1 billion. Was maybe less, 600 million, something like that. I don't have the number in front of me. Instagram was also on the order of like $1 billion. Almost every major founder-led startup that got acquired prior to that date in time was like much lower than $1 billion. But then you start to see these exits like GitHub at what, 7 point something billion dollars, HashiCorp now 36 billion. Shopify went public. Fastly, Fastly is another Ruby company that I'm sure I would think that the founders wound up with a pretty chunk of change. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Ruby has generated more wealth for programmers than any other language, and that it isn't even on a per capita basis, and it isn't even remotely close. Because if you just think of all of the hits, even the failed companies, like a lot of Rubyists I know made a lot of money at Groupon, a lot of money at Living Social, a lot of companies that built on Rails, and those are like the visible ones, but there's also a lot of invisible companies that have been built on Rails that have generated a lot of money. And so I think Mike, actually, yeah, it was Mike, because in his text to me summarizing this tweet or his reaction to it, he says, I do kind of feel like cares about developers respecting you and cares about successful business are usually opposing forces in terms of founder ideology. I would almost think of it in terms of Ruby and Rails creating the perfect yin and yang for this, where Ruby is focused on developer happiness and Rails. So that's Matt's, the creator of Ruby, his ethos is what will I find happy, like programmer happiness in, path of least surprise, all these principles for making a happy programming language. Whereas David is all about productivity, the one person framework. Can I ship a fully realized vision that's as good as anything else as an individual or as a very small team and on a budget and very clear, like quickly, you know, and that's where principles like dry, don't repeat yourself are emphasized. So the combination of Ruby and Rails create this dialogue between the two as you're going from the kind of organizational level, the framework level concerns of how do I plug this stuff together in Rails land, to the micro and the like, you know, like the individual functionality and the methods and the implementations at the Ruby level. And that's where programmer happiness is more important. I think it creates this sort of perpetual motion cadence that drives people forward. And it's, I mean, there's reasons why I use Rails and Ruby, but I would love to see somebody who's like doing a PhD in some sort of like sociology and technology, like to understand if there is something here. I don't know. I think that the specialness of Ruby and Rails to make programmers wealthy is, I can't think of another combo. I can't think of another technology that's been, you know, the fact that Ruby was never captured by a particular vendor, right? Like a platform, like a Microsoft or a Sun Oracle, or nowadays like a Google, meant that it opened the door to Rails to create a cornucopia of different businesses that weren't also tied to some platform or dependent on it. And the way that platform plays always work is like, oh, well, you know, like, and you see this with Next.js, a lot of the value in that open source stack will get sucked up by the platform, because that's what the platform is for. Because the open source that they put out, like the language or the, you know, the frameworky bits, are there to drive in users, and then like in the enshittification under the Cory Doctorow ideology, then they find a way to like suck the value out after that adoption has spiked. But Ruby and Rails, existing outside the whole kind of like vendor-backed tech stack world, never even had that concern. It was all about, hey, go in a million different directions. Let's have a Rails app that does literally everything and anything, you know, and there is now at this point. And so you just put the community that comes around that, the kind of community that forms around it, without being told to, will naturally, it's like, oh yeah, well, you know, like, and especially early days, this was clear because the community was a little bit more cohesive. Be like, oh yeah, you got Harvest over there and they're doing a time materials and an invoice tracking app. So that's the Railsy one of those. And because Rails apps had a particular focus to them and simplicity to them, everything from how the URLs worked to the UX and UI. And I think they have an opportunity to get that again, reclaim that mantle with like by embracing the Rails 7 hot wired front end stuff. It wouldn't have made sense for me to go and build a time materials thing. Instead, I would have been like, you know, if I was in the room and thinking along those lines, I'd be like, oh, I'll do an expense reporting thing instead. We have like Gusto, another Rails app, like does payroll stuff. I think their original name was Zenefits. Was it? No, it was Zen Payroll. That was it. I think it was Zen Payroll. And another app that I also think might have been a Rails app was Zenefits, which was like, we'll do benefits management, right? So you end up with like just this like ecosystem of apps where everyone kind of carves out their own lane, not because it's like a coordinated oligopoly, but it's like, well, somebody's already building a good Rails like invoice and time and materials app. And for me to do the same thing would basically be just to be doing the same thing. And that sounds boring. Like, let's solve another problem. Oh yeah, there's not a good expense receipt tracker. Like, let's go build that. And if there is a good one of those in Rails, I don't know. But unfortunately, apps like Expensify took off, which was a .NET app. It was a goddamn nightmare. What a piece of shit. That whole company. Like the founder put my beef with Expensify, other than having used it, was that like the CEO wrote a blog post with a big banner that said like, we fire people. Like, if you're not cutting it as a programmer, we fire you, which is audacious. And you read the post about it, and I was like, if you're going to write this post, you got to show up. If you're going to write this post and live in this glass house and say that you're such a genius at engineering management and that your app is so incredible and the quality is so high that you brag about firing low performers, then boy howdy, when Justin Searles comes a knocking, it better not be a buggy, shitty, garbage user experience. And you'll never guess what Expensify always was, and now as they try to pivot into a totally different business model because Slack ate their lunch. Slack and a million other things. So what really killed Expensify was a instead of charging for like tracking expenses on a per seat basis, which was their business model, and still I guess sort of is. All of these other expense tracking systems were like, oh, wait, hold on. The software is secondary. Like we should just give out debit cards and then make all of our profits on the swipe fees for the debit cards, right? Handing out the company cards instead. And then the expense tracking software, we can give that for free. So now it's like, now they have to compete against free. I won't be shedding any tears for Expensify. I thought for years, maybe I'll make an expense tracking app. But anyway, don't be an asshole would be my advice. Next up in the news. Oh yeah, I mentioned Peter Cooper. Ruby Weekly put out last week a link to a post that I did where I was comparing Llama 3, the new LLM, which I only this week realized like they called it Llama because Llama has the letters L, L, and M so nicely right there. I'm not the sharpest bulb in the shed. Anyway, yeah, so Llama 3 came out, and they, speaking about big claims, according to The Verge, anyway, I didn't bother to like read the keynote or watch the keynote. According to The Verge, Zuck qualified or claimed that Llama 3 was as good or better at coding tasks as GPT-4. And as I read that, I don't have that smell-o-vision USB adapter that Intel announced 25 years ago, and then I don't think ever shipped. I don't have one of those. And yet, as I was scrolling, the fragrant aroma of bullshit emerged from my computer because that seemed impossible. Llama is so far behind GPT and has been that if Llama 3 is somehow an improvement, then I was like, all right, I'm here. So I go to meta.ai.com and I'm like, here's a simple program, like a medium complexity programming task. It totally whiffs. And then I did another one later. It totally whiffed. And at that point I was like, what would GPT-4 say with the same prompt? And like, it did a lot better on both. And then I had one more throughout the day and I recorded what they each said after that. And of course, Llama also just shat the bed. So I did a blog post with screenshot side-by-sides of these. And boy, I could not be less impressed with where Llama's at. And I've been thinking a lot because I've been using Copilot, which is based on GPT, some unspecified flavor of GPT from OpenAI. I've been using Copilot almost every day for 1.5 years. Right? Yes, 1.5 years. My sense of things is that the approach of taking a large language model with, trillions of documents and only a small portion of those documents being code, and of the code, it's everything. It's everything that you can find on the internet, good and bad. On average, publicly available code is probably better than literally average code. So if there is, if you think of a pie chart of 100% of the code that's ever been written, I suspect that 5% or less, probably significantly less than 5%, probably less than like 3% of all the code ever written is available on the internet. Probably less than 1%. A lot of code gets written that's never like the source isn't shared. Unless you count obfuscated JavaScript, which I wouldn't, like on a website. So little code is actually available publicly. of the code, there's several bottleneck effects. Of the code that's available publicly, I think the quality level is typically higher because a lot of that is open source. A lot of that is written to be, as educational material, is written into blog posts, for example. I think that it is above average, almost certainly. The average code that a web crawler would run into is going to be better than the dreck that you'd find in most closed source business applications. No offense to business and closed source, but like a lot of shit passes and gets pushed that is not very good. Which is great for demand generation for, consulting businesses that try to make things better. Pro tip. Even then, the best that an LLM that takes everything in the absence of like a scoring mechanism or some way to run the code or some way to live with the code long enough to deal with bad design, to arrive at a feedback loop of this is good, this is bad. The best you could ever hope for is kind of like a median level quality developer would emerge from an LLM. And I think we're pretty much there with GPT-4. My sense of it is GPT-4 is roughly where the middle of the bell curve would land of coder who is well-read and is very familiar with open source. And that is a useful person to pair with, especially if you know less than the median developer. But when you know more than the median developer, as I might reasonably claim to do, you see exactly where it falls down, what it doesn't know, when it gets out over its skis. And it happens enough that I don't trust it to write code for me, to generate code. I would never, when I've pasted in blindly, I very often burn myself. And I find enough wrong with it that like, I know what I'm dealing with, I guess I should say, right? Like, this isn't about what you should use LLMs for versus not. But I'm starting to come around to the idea that median developer of openly available code, if that's the best that the LLMs can produce, and it stands to reason, it seems reasonable that it would be, because how, if they can't run the code and if they don't have any scoring mechanism, like, they get good at video games because they can just like know what the score that they got on a particular run is and keep on doing new runs and trials until the score goes up or whatever the definition of success is. The LLMs don't have that. The chatbots don't really have that for a lot of things. The image generators do. That's why you get 4 images when you generate an image and you pick the best one. So they're getting feedback from the user. This is the best one. And the chatbots will occasionally, if there's a low confidence score or like high volatility between two options, like they might run 2 generations next to you and say, hey, which one of these is better? But like I think the average viewer can pick the better looking image, but like if junior developers are 90% of the people that are like spamming Copilot or GPT-4, and then you're telling them to pick between the 2 better options, they're not the expert. They're not the right person to ask. So I feel like it's not race to the bottom. It's just like race to the median developer. And I feel like GPT-4 won that race. But then the next question is like, what is that? Like, what is the utility of that? And that's what I mean when I say I feel like we're kind of getting to this same thing with self-driving cars. We're getting to this with, Vision Pro and real VR and immersion. Like, it's an asymptotic goal where the last 10% is going to be 90% of the work. So I'm starting to feel like structurally, like, we need a different strategy. I think ideologically, if you want code generation to be your AI thing, you need to train on some kind of you have to have an opinion of what good code is, or you have to have a way to score the suitability of code, hopefully by executing it longitudinally, right? Imagine a feedback loop of AI generated code hits production and it is what was that verb that we used to use? Instrumented. It is instrumented in such a way that there's effectively like a bytecode like watermark or a commented watermark of saying like this was generated by such and such with these inputs and outputs. And then you could see over a period of years how many performance issues or how many bugs ultimately get flagged to that particular generation of code or the prompt that resulted in it. And then that could score back as training data to like only if you either do something like that, which is probably impossibly complex without building a whole platform that's designed to be that Mobius strip of code to usage to telemetry to training to code. That'd be a cool business. The only other thing that I think you can do in the sort of the current world is have a goddamn opinion about what is good code and then train on that. My youth pastor in high school, I have no idea if this is true. He would say, and I don't know why he said it. I don't know what the point of the anecdote was. I missed that, but he said this anecdote so many times I remembered. He's like, when you're training as a bank teller, they don't give you a bunch of counterfeit currency to look at to understand what counterfeits look like. He would say they just give you real currency, and you look at it really closely under a variety of different contexts and different ages of the currency and different, and so what you do is you get really good at knowing the real currency when you see it so that the counterfeits just jump out at you. That's what I think the LLMs need, right? Is they need the real code, like good stuff. And our only problem there is most programmers who are currently employed today have also never seen real good code and wouldn't know how to put it together if they wanted to. I hate to say it. So I'm not super duper pessimistic. If I was trying to build a code assistant, I would try to have a theory of the cases to like what is good code, and I would train it on that. And I would just like give it a lot of good code, as much good code as I could find, and it would be very curated. That's yeah, I was thinking about code assistants. Anyway, moving right along. The next item's about something. It's about my own website, so it's not news. But I mean, tweets aren't news, so here we are talking about my website. If you go to justin.searles.co/spots, you will now see a map. And that is an Apple MapKit.js map. And it's currently showing Japan because that's where most of the pins are. I put a pin in it. Thanks, Aaron. Of all of the restaurants I visited with Tabelog and that I bothered to log since 2019. I didn't load everything I ever did in Foursquare. But I figured it would be nice to be able to. I just had like this random epiphany in the shower 5, 6, 7 days ago. And I thought, man, it would be so damn cool if instead of, because I really do miss that aspect of Foursquare or Swarm where I'd like know where I'd been and be able to see a map of where I have been and then share that map with others and by way of like recommendations, for example. But like no platform really does that anymore. And Swarm and Foursquare, like even if I did have my Foursquare list, it's like, what's the average person going to do with that now? Because Foursquare is so dead. So I thought, like, what do I really need to accomplish this? I already have these pretty elaborate Apple shortcuts that all I need to do is like, if I'm at a website, and I should share these someday, like I do a video of how these work. But if I'm at a website, I'll click the share sheet and I'll do like, if I want to make a link post, I'll say post link. And the shortcut will read the URL, grab the title, grab the slug, grab or generate a slug, grab the current like ISO 8601 timestamp and then format it the way that my permalinks are typically formatted. And it will create the YAML front matter for my blog post with all the values filled out of like, the date, the title, the linked URL. And then it'll save that to a markdown file after pulling down there's an iOS app that downloads or that is works with Git repositories called Working Copy. So it'll like use a working copy shortcut to fetch the latest from my blog, which is all just in Git. And then I will, it'll create the markdown file there, and then it'll pop me into the editor so I can just hit, type my little comment, put in my little block quote from the source post and hit save. And for all of the types of media on my site, like the takes and the shots, I got to share those as a photo post from the Photos app. Those all have respective shortcuts. And so I was like, why not in the Maps app? I could just do create spot. All of the media types in my website are plural 5-letter words. So spots, takes, shots. And so that's why they're monospace on the side. It's just like the cute thing. Podcasts are casts, even though I don't love that. So I was like, oh, spots. As soon as I thought of the name, as always with me, I thought of the name first, and I was like, yes, that's what they are. They're spots. So I now when I'm in the map application, I can just do share, create spot via the shortcuts, and then that'll, using shortcuts, given a map location, you can get the name of the place, you can get the latitude and longitude, which is kind of all I need, and then the URL back to the map. So it's a pleasant experience. So these will just be like blog posts now with a little map at top, and with at the index of the spots page, like all the other pins. And when you're looking at the pin, you can see where it is, what it's around. And then there's a little like a map link to the right of the annotation over that pin where you can actually go and open it in your Maps application, right? So that's what I wanted to build. I built a thing to ingest all my Tabe log posts because I'm about to go to Japan. I'm going to be going out a lot. So I wanted to seed it with something useful. So that was a really fun little project. MapKit.js is no more complex, if not maybe even a little simpler than figuring out how complicated like Google's API key system and everything. It's like a nightmare because it has changed so many times in the past. So yeah, I like the Maps JavaScript setup a lot. It was pretty straightforward. It was surprisingly modern. I guess it came out in 2018, but like they're on version 5, and it was very easy to use in a relatively modern context. So I shared a little bit like how I made a custom full screen mode because there's not a full screen option. But like when you're on a phone and you're you're looking at a little tiny thumbnail size map, having a full screen mode seemed clutch. So I did that. But I was genuinely like, it was a good time. I would encourage people who need a map in their application to look seriously at MapKit.js. It's just very nice. And it looks so much more professional and debranded compared to Google Maps. I think Google Maps, like the design of Google Maps is so distinctively googly that I would never want that on my website. Ooh. So yeah, I was really proud of that. I felt good. That was a perfect example of like a weekend project. It took me like half a day to kind of get a proof of concept going, couple hours to fight with shortcuts to get that going, half a day to ingest all the Tabe log stuff to seed it. Yeah, I don't know. I love little stuff like that. I love making cute nonsense things that don't create any monetary value, but they do enrich my life somehow, because this gives me a way to share places very quickly in a low friction, low effort way. As I go to a place in Japan, I'm like, or wherever, and I want to share it and I want to write a quick blog post. All I got to do is go into the map, tap 5 things, and all I got to do then is write the note and hit save, and then it's on the web. So my publishing workflow for the website is the reason that I've been posting so much. Just like people tweet a lot or Instagram a lot because they're in that app all the time. They just click plus, and then it's a very low friction thing. I've made a low friction publishing pipeline for myself. And I want that for others. And just like I talked about last week with recommendation engine, owning your own website and all that stuff, I want to be part of the solution there somehow. I want other people to have the experience of being able to like post really low friction stuff. But the thing is, like, what I've built is so coupled to my particular silliness that for me to like tease out or make this modular or to make this open source would be impossibly difficult. And then the fact it's not like a real app, it's not a real platform, right? Like now I'm like, sharing a collection of like 8 shortcuts that you'd have to go in and customize each. Now it really only works for developers. And whenever you're doing building a tool that only works for developers, you're really like, you're just going to get a lot of opinions. It's not going to perfectly fit their own particular, preferences or whatever. So I would only do this if I could help the commoners, the people who are not programmers, who want to have a website and who want to feel good control over it like this and have such a nice experience without being tied to one of the platforms. So I keep kicking that around. Maybe it's something that I'll build someday. Yeah, we'll see. Version 11 of the podcast. The title of this podcast is I'm Feeling Unlucky. And it goes out to Ed Zytron. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. But it's about a fella whose name is, and I've forgotten all the names of the principals in this story about Google. Ben Gomes, who had previously been the head of search, who came to Google in 1999 and helped to build search. And the villain of the story, Prabhakar Raghavan, I hope is how you pronounce his name, who is a McKinsey alum. Well, wait, no. Sundar Pichai is a McKinsey alum, and Prabhakar Raghavan seems to have just learned a lot of lessons from management consultants. So he was in charge of search and ads at Yahoo, and oversaw the complete just demise of Yahoo's search. And then, as you read this article, which I believe is mostly sourced from recent lawsuits against Google's email dumps to try to understand why has Google search. Hey, backing up a second. This is an essay. It's a newsletter by a person named Ed, whose last name is either Zytron, or Zytron, to continue to answer the question, or start to answer the question, maybe why, though, is Google so much worse now than it was even a few years ago? And the easy explanations are, I think even Occam's razor would say, well, it's worse now because we've got all these closed off platforms. We've got SEO and robo-generated, AI-generated nonsense that's trying to hack PageRank to get up the results. And it's Google who has to continue to, like, the image that we've had for the last 15 years is it's Google who has to continue to update its search to compete with in the arms race of them versus SEO hackers to keep Google search vital and useful and relevant. This story, and I'm not going to actually, because we've chatted a bunch so far today. I'm not going to give the whole blow by blow. This story is one of the most riveting accountings of a company reaching that second to third generation of leaders. When I think of Google leadership, I think, there is the engineering founder led Sergey Brin, Larry Page. Then there was the scaling manager, Eric Schmidt. And now we're in the operate mode. The 3 X's in the Kent Beck sort of like the phases of any initiative are explore, which often lends itself to engineering heavy founders that can pivot and try a lot of different things and experiment. The second X is expand. So you've got the product market fit, and now you just got to grow this thing, and you got to make sure it doesn't fall apart on the way up. And then you take that rocket all the way to the tippity top of the mountain. And once you're done expanded, you might burn a lot of money and capital to get to that point. You might hire up thousands of people. Then it's the final X, the third X is extract. And that's when you start getting the money out of it, right? So you make it operational. And so the kind of manager who will figure out how to operationalize a business so that it's sustainable and it's resilient and that you're able to continue to use that enterprise as a source of reliable profit. that's often I think there's a book called The Three Founders, like describing the same sort of like usually a different leader for different jobs. Under Sundar Pichai, my view has been he's there as the extract guy. You know, he is the McKinsey consultant. He's the one who should be figuring out how do I make Google make money forever and get more higher margins and make the numbers go up. And there are real risks when you're that guy. There are real risks that you will turn the financial metrics into the primary input of what the company is, and you'll lose yourself in the process. And it seems to me that the image that we had that Google was in this arms race to just keep up with all the people doing SEO crap was too generous, because what seems to really have been happening is as Google has sort of plateaued, become less relevant, maybe as the search product, you know, honestly, you could build the best search in the world. And it's possible that like, as people spend more time in these isolated platforms, or use like their phone instead of a search engine to find the Facebook page, right? Like a huge proportion of Google searches are literally just people using it as a navigation tool, right? Find me the Facebook login, then they'll click they'll Google that as opposed to typing the URL, because no one knows what a URL is anymore. And then they'll click the link, right? So as people search less, and there could be lots of reasons for that aren't necessarily bad reasons. What Google seems to have done was have a whole bunch of metrics, and apart from the truly financial metrics, one of them was queries, the query count. How many queries are people querying? When that number started going down, they announced a massive freak out DEFCON 1 level, like, we got to fix this. And you talk to the search designers, the people in charge of the search product, and they're like, you know, like, I'm sure this conversation happened. This wasn't literally in any of the emails that are quoted in this newsletter. But like, you know, people search to know something. You know, the Google's mission was to organize the world's information. If somebody searches something and our results are so fucking good that they don't need to do a second search because they learned the thing, then that's actually us succeeding at our mission. And whenever you have a metric that more queries is better, and you're trying to maximize that as a KPI or a key performance indicator, like, if that's at odds with your mission, or at least not, it's not good enough for a metric to facially just be at odds. Like when you're trying to decide this is a good or bad metric, if it's facially like, this is like, you know, upside down, right? Like if the goal of the business is to make a profit, and you have a metric of like, we want to maximize the number of energy bars that people are eating in the cafeteria. Like you'd be like, well, that if we play this out to its logical conclusion, we're going to eat infinitely many energy bars, which is going to cost a lot of money, and then our profits are going to go down. So you don't see a lot of KPIs like that. But if you've got a KPI that's even glancingly, if it's gameable, if somebody could game that, the number of queries, and result in the level of service or the quality or so the long-term viability of whatever it is you make or sell, then you probably have a bad metric, or you need to use that metric very, very carefully. One way, and I see a lot of leadership teams do this, they'll have metrics that are safe to share internally up and down the organization to use because they're so difficult to game and they're so core to the mission and the drive of the company. Getting alignment on that is totally valid, and up and down the company, they communicate those things. They might even measure people's individual performance against them. But then there are other metrics that are good, maybe leading indicators of how are things going or what's happening macroeconomically. And maybe queries, number of queries is good for that, right? Like, hey, people are searching less, and whether that's good or not, that does have a direct correlation to how many ads people are seeing, which has a direct correlation to how much money we're making. So at an executive level, I'm sure it's a good metric. But if if it's a metric that you run more than a couple layers down the org chart, now you're browbeating the people who are building the search product and saying, hey, not enough people are searching. And they use the phrase engagement hacks. Like, you're giving us a perverse incentive to hack engagement, right? To create dark patterns and like find a way where, if we just reduce the quality of the answers that Google gives people, then they'll have to type in a second query and a third query and a fourth query, and they'll be back. Anyway, Prabhakar Raghavan, apparently the new head of search, was previously head of ads, and was at the center of this particular scandal. Only heretofore not reported on anywhere, except for Ed's newsletter. Has clearly just lost the plot on what's the point of the search engine, as if it's an oil well. And the difference between a search engine that seems to make infinite money and an oil well that seems to extract infinite oil, which is fungible and exchangeable for money, is that there are people using the search engine who see that it sucks and then they use it less. There's a reason, like, if Google search was as good as it could have been, this is a lot of this happened in 2019, but I suspect the rot started several years before that. If Google had been firing in all cylinders to make Google search really good, they probably would have been earlier to using LLMs and incorporating them into search. They probably would have been earlier to figuring out ways to embed answers to real questions. And yes, revenue might have gone down, but it would have expanded their lead and entrenched their usefulness and educated their users to keep coming back to them. Instead, by slow walking that stuff, because where your eye really is looking at is like, what can we do to maximize ad revenue? And then here in 2019, this breaking point where it's like, actually, we're willing to sacrifice the quality. Because as you read towards the end, it's like, oh, wow, they apparently rolled back a lot of quality updates because the quality updates resulted in less revenue. And so Google search actually got worse, regressed, and like a lot of like SEO spam places came back because they just like hit undo, and that's how they resolved this issue of not enough people Googling. Yeah, it's people use Google, they see that it's not good, and now we're at their Google. Everyone Google's like, why the fuck are people using ChatGPT as if it's a search engine? And the answer is your search engine. You pissed in the well, and you are optimizing for a metric that makes all of the humans who can observe the quality of your search engine think that it sucks, right? If I really want to know the answer to an actual question, I do what a lot of people do. And I'm like, if I have a bad query and I was like, oh, this is all garbage, I just put Reddit at the end of the query. And a lot of people do it. And people have been covering that phenomenon for years. And Google actually recently paid Reddit for like API level access so that it can incorporate Reddit results into the results. I don't know. You read this article and you think Sundar Pichai probably has to go. This guy probably has to go. And we're hearing about this now only because there was a lawsuit that resulted in discovery that these emails came out. Imagine if we found out about this when we normally would, which is after the company had a 1.5, 2 year decline of really rough financials. Then the blame game starts, and then the profiles start getting written, and the investigative reporters, wake up. So the way that I read this is we were blessed with this intelligence thanks to the lawsuit and Ed actually reading stuff, combing through these emails to rebuild a narrative. Google and everyone just got like a 3-year head start on the demise of Google as we know it. And now it's up to the shareholders, board members at Alphabet to ask themselves, Do we want to just ride this walrus all the way down, as will be foretold in this article, unless there's something going on internally that is not apparent? Or is this an opportunity for us to save and rescue the company? And that's why I think this is just apart from being compelling narrative, by pulling forward awareness of what the fuck's going on here before it's way too late, before Google's literally out of the game and just the next Yahoo or Excite or Alta Vista or Ask Jeeves, or Lycos or Dogpile. Have I forgotten anybody? I don't want to forget anybody. It's an opportunity to change course. And I hope somebody does. I hope that this gets more traction outside of just the tech press. I don't think it will. I think the powers that be, the chase of quarterly revenue, I think that the leadership is too locked in. So I'm feeling unlucky. You know what? I don't have anything down here for recommendations. I guess I can recommend Star Trek Into Darkness if you like over the top sci-fi blockbusters. I forgot to write down any recommendations and stuff. I'm working through season 2 of Invasion, another Apple TV show. Still, I talked about the Fallout game, Fallout series. I just watched episode 2 last night. I'm taking my time with it because it's so carefully crafted, and the level of investment in shows like that is so high that I feel like I'm doing it a disservice by rushing through it. So I want to give it my full attention. Unfortunately, because it's on Amazon Video and that doesn't have an app for Vision Pro, I can't download it and watch it on the plane, which is a damn shame. I totally would have. Yeah, not a lot of other recommendations, I guess. Man, I got to find a new game. I got the Delta emulator on my phone, like everyone else in America, apparently. And I'd played with Delta several times because I've installed the alt store and stuff, and I just don't think it's that good. It's fine, but the settings that I want aren't available. It's fine. Like save state sync, cloud sync. I think if Apple were to make an emulator, I think that's what he's going for. If Apple were to make an emulator without a lot of configuration options, without overwhelming you, this is what it would look like. But for me, I am apparently just particular enough that I don't think I'm ever going to really get into using Delta. Well, I'm really waiting for like a RetroArch port. So yeah, but I'm going to set it up just enough to have a couple games to play while I'm traveling. With a Backbone One controller shell, I would never use a touchscreen to control a real game. All right, so let's get into the mailbag. Last version, I let you all know that mailing back to the show is now considered mandatory. Every time you send an email to podcast@searles.co, you receive license to listen to 3 new episodes. That's the rule. Okay, so every 3 episodes that you listen to, any amount of the episode, we're a ways into this one. If you only listen to the first 15 minutes, it still counts as a listen. Then you got to write in. You write in, you get a 3 episode license. Them's the rules. I don't make them up. I'm sorry, just following them. Neil was among several people, quite a lot of people. Actually, the mailbag doth runneth over. So it's good to hear from so many of you, to know that you're there. As much as I purport to like shouting into the void, I did have a crisis of conscience, being like, is anyone really listening? Is anyone there? I intentionally don't track any metrics on this show. I don't know how many downloads there are. I don't want to create yet another make the numbers go up thing in my life. Because I've just seen how what it does to my brain chemistry. But getting an email every week, at least, in this case, a dozen emails from you all is very nice. So, and I know that's probably still just a fraction, because most people, even if you tell them, yo, I will insert threatening language here if you don't email me. Even then they wouldn't. The kids these days don't even know email. Send me a letter. Send me a postcard. Why don't you? Anyway, I'm going to read a few emails. Honor that work that you all did. Well, that some of you did. Neil says, will AI eliminate software development jobs? I think yes and no, but mostly no. AI will end software development jobs the same way building bigger highways has ended traffic jams, which is to say that each programming job eliminated will, Hydra-like, be replaced with 2 more. I think, and this is a longer email, but it's Neil's a very thoughtful guy, and he's soft-spoken, so when he speaks, I listen. I think that software development has always been supply constrained. Most software needs are going unmet. All developer productivity increases through our brief history. This might be a sentence fragment, or I'm just not reading it right. So basically, all developer productivity increases, where that was even a concept, have been gobbled up by businesses and other organizations, but mostly businesses. And I don't see that stopping in our lifetimes either. I buy this in a sense. I think the problem is when you talk about software in using language of quantity, right? Like productivity as measured by revenue per person is actually a refreshingly clarifying measure, because measuring productivity in terms of keystrokes or lines of code or pull requests or any of this other stuff is so slippery, because you could write millions and millions of lines of code that does, hardly anything, and 1,000 lines of code that does a lot. And we all know in software about like how fraught it is to measure productivity in terms of lines of code. But effectively, like when we ask what does the AI actually do, it generates lines of code, generates a lot of them. And it can do it faster, and it doesn't get tired. And one of the reasons we don't measure lines of code is that, as like a metric, similar to the queries with Google, if you measure it, you will value it. And if you value lines of code, that's what you're going to get, is lots of lines of code. And the more code you have to deal with, that's a lot of carrying cost. You got to review it and either inspect it for bugs or manage its bugs, or it'll increase proportionally the cognitive load required to understand the system or that relevant subsystem, the more lines that there are. And one thing that I keep hearing from people is that overall code change sets are bigger this year than last year, significantly. More people are using code assistants, more people on teams are participating. One little known thing about a lot of software teams is typically there are a couple overperformers in terms of the people producing. Usually they're more senior. More less experienced developers are putting a lot of code out, because I suspect code generation tools are helping them produce a lot more code. And so it's changing the mix of who's contributing and at what level of experience and quality. All of that's creating more work. And so when that's, I think, what Neil's saying, when each programming job eliminated will Hydra-like be replaced with 2 more, I think the jobs that are eliminated will be job postings. We will hire maybe fewer people than we otherwise would. But we will right now it's hard to see a future where we don't end up with even more code managed by fewer people. And that code is less understood than ever. And that does indeed create maybe not new jobs, but new liabilities and new risks, which we've also seen that story. What happens when you've got a high liability code base with not a lot of people watching it? It's like, well, maybe it's time to rewrite. So then you get into serially rewriting the same thing over and over again because you never did it right. I suspect it's going, AI as a trend in software is going to exacerbate all of our bad habits as an industry. And I suspect that's kind of what you're getting at, Neil. So yeah, I appreciate the note. I to answer your question, I don't think the AI will eliminate the need for software, the demand for software development jobs anytime soon. I think what it will do is reduce the number of companies that think that the path to success is to scale up to 2,000 developers, right? Which was also a problem. I was, and Shopify was like, hey, in 2020, we're going to hire 2,000 developers. I was like, why? To do what? I thought that your app was mostly built. And surely I'm sure that they had stuff to do, and I have lots of friends at Shopify, and I'm glad that they have jobs. But there was a sickness in the VC-backed zero interest rate phenomenon of more developers looks more impressive. The bigger the headcount, the more we can sell a story to the next round of investors, and so on and so forth. And because the money is free, why not? That I think that there's a whiplash now of like probably excessive frugality. Like give us a ration. Basically, if I was an investor and for the last 15 years, I'd been telling startups, or I'd been thinking that startups needed a lot of developers to get anything done, I now have two, and then that blew up in my face spectacularly. I now have two options. Either I was wrong, or a new technology has come along that reduces the need for developers. Now, one thing that I've known about a lot of wealthy people who fancy themselves as being very successful and very smart, they will tend to adopt any explanation that isn't they were wrong, as long as it's feasible, before they will consider that they might have been wrong, which is why I think Google is fucked, right? Because I don't think anyone at the top of Google is going to read that newsletter and be like, yes, I'm going to have my come to Sergey moment and apologize for fucking his business up. Because a lot of the same people who are investing in companies now and who fancy themselves as like Silicon Valley leaders are having to operate in an environment without zero interest rate money and find a way to win investment and find a way to craft narratives for the next quintillion-dollar businesses. AI gives them such an easy way to change the narrative, not because they were wrong, but because, well, now with all these LLMs, we don't need so many developers anymore, which just so happens to map really well to a moment in time when capital is not less capital, but the capital that's out there to invest is more wants to see a better return than they're going to get at their 5% money market account, right? And so because the loans aren't free anymore, I think investors are better scrutinizing expenses at fast growth companies. And so, yeah, I think AI just becomes the story as to why we don't hire so many developers. That's probably the biggest impact. I don't think it's going to be like, oh, all the AI is so good now we can fire half the people that are already here. That seems way less likely, because I don't think we're going to no engineering department's ever going to have the day being like, man, we're so fucking productive and we're producing so much good stuff that we can say goodbye to Ashley. That seems unlikely. I think almost all productivity gains that we've ever experienced post computers have been turned out like bullshit. And I mean that in the revenue per person sense and way more in the lines of code sense. So thank you, Neil. Check. Vlad writes an email to me saying that he started the book Courage to be Disliked and he didn't make it very far. I didn't really agree with either the student or the philosopher guy. And then they started getting into abstract Freudian stuff like trauma. So yeah, I didn't get far. I forgot to give a content warning that the first chapter and the first chapter's title, which I think is There Is No Trauma, at least in Japanese, it was something like that, is very provocative in the book Courage to be Disliked. Enough that I spent the first probably 30 pages being like, I don't like this. This is dumb. This is wrong. I'd read a couple negative Amazon reviews. And I was like, this is not my jam. And I am glad I stuck with it. like it really turned a corner. So if you do try reading this book and you are turned off by the first, both the provocativeness and also some of the argumentation in the first chapter, even the second chapter, I had to muscle through that. I don't know why I did, but I'm glad I did. So thank you for that. PSA, Vlad, I appreciate it. William writes in, he says, on the topic of leaving the cloud, I've just purchased my first NAS, NAS, all caps. NAS stands for Network Attached Storage, from Synology. Synology is basically the only company that makes NAS devices, hard drives that sit with an operating system on your network, which I'm aiming to substitute my various cloud storage providers, as in Dropbox and iCloud, etc. Have you ever used one, and have you ever thought about using one in your home setup? So I have a Synology something NAS, one of the ones that's pretty good with 4 bays of hard disks, configured in a way using the Synology RAID so that if one of the hard drives dies, I think maybe even if 2 of the hard drives die, I don't lose any data. I don't have a great use for them, though. I have our computers do Time Machine to them, but it's so inconsistent that like it might go 2 months without getting a real backup. It's I have them as network sharers that I can I can drop files onto, and I back up like a big thing of folders. That's not super useful. I've been meaning to get around to rsyncing like my main documents folder, at least from one computer, so I've got an off-device backup of it. Haven't gotten around to that. I got a Plex Media server with like the 5 videos that I have that aren't on some streaming service. So I've not gotten good use out of mine. But one of the things that William's pointing to is that there's a sort of like a Dropbox kind of app that runs in the Synology that like you can kind of have your own private cloud. And I would do that, except like the thing that the cloud solves for me is like it's fast everywhere, no matter where I am. Whereas once I leave the home, the Synology is only as fast as my upload stream on my shitty cable connection. So that's a -1. That's one reason not to do it. And the other is if my home blows up, I will lose my computers, and on most days I will lose my computers, and I will also lose that NAS, is my guess. So the fact that it's not offsite doesn't really make me feel all safe. So I don't really I've got iCloud and I got the advanced data protection such that like it would be supposedly it would be difficult for Apple even to get into like my iCloud drive. I don't know what is to be gained by having a private cloud on a Synology other than scratching a nerd itch, to be honest. That's just I'm trying to be more generous. Using it in that sort of private cloud way, I will say this, like, is probably better than me manually syncing stuff over every now and then. And I should probably think about that. It'd be really interesting to see what would happen if I did one of those sync folders. Oh, I know what happens. Yeah, so I use Synology, what do they call it? OneDrive or something. I think I have done this. And I turned it on to like my documents folder on each of my computers, which is also separately synced to iCloud. And it was a fucking nightmare. It was constantly churning and spinning, and it used a lot of CPU, and it would fill my disk up, and especially on my MacBook Air, because it would see like, something's trying to read this file, and that file is in the cloud. And so then it would use all this bandwidth to download every single file every time that the OneDrive daemon would stumble upon it. And then it would download that, and then it would push it to it was to the point where like, oh man, my computers are really not working well. And it took me a few weeks to be like, oh, it's this. I turned it off, and then my computers were working well again. So yeah, no, I've just decided I'm not going to have anything to do with that again. I just don't need it, but good luck to you. Give it a try. Maybe it'll work for you, especially if you don't try combining multiple cloud services overlaid. Let's see, where are we at? Let's do one more. David writes in. David says, I don't remember if you talked about this before, but do you play any games on console? We've had bad luck with our consoles lately, and it's making me wonder if I need to jettison everything and get a PC for Game Pass. I expect I'd still have issues with a PC, but I'd at least be able to tinker with it more than a console. So if you're not familiar, if you don't follow games, basically the PS4 and Xbox One generation were a departure from previous game console generations, because they're basically just like low to mid-range contemporaneous gaming PCs. They're all running x86 architecture. Their GPUs are not somehow special. Like the PS3 had like a crazy CPU architecture, the cell chip, and it's why it was too expensive. And it was hard to program for. But like they claimed that they could eke out this performance that you couldn't any other way, like custom graphics chips and so forth. That era is now gone, and so everything is effectively an x86 computer, and it's just a matter of what is available on which platform. The Nintendo Switch is an ARM chip, which is basically the same platform family as like Apple's platforms. So everything is now using roughly commodity computing hardware. And that was the moment that like console games stopped making any sense, because all you're really doing is you're paying some amount of money, probably $500, $400 for a partially subsidized piece of gaming hardware, so that you can play games that are going to be more expensive, not as modifiable. No bugs are going to be able to be, like you're saying, like if you have any issues or bugs or encounter any problems, you're not going to be able to tinker in there. The games won't have mod support, won't be able to back up your saves and control your data quite as well. You're not going to get all the crazy sales that come available on PC games. Tend to have much steeper sales than console games. Subscription services like Game Pass. The Game Pass is available for Xbox and for PC. But, I think if I owned an Xbox One X and my gaming PC, which has a much more powerful GPU and CPU, I would never use the Xbox One X. In fact, if I had one, I might use it to stream from the PC into another room. That's silly. Cheaper hardware can do that. I have a PS5. PS5 has a lot of exclusives, right? Sony has a lot of exclusives. It's just that like none of them have been very interesting for several years, and now they have adopted a strategy of wait a year or two and then take those exclusives and put them on PC, which signals to me I definitely don't need a PS6, right? So they're doing it because they're trying to double dip. They're like, oh well, we can get these games now. Spider-Man 2 costs $300 million to make. We can make more of our investment back if we do a windowed release of it'll be exclusive to our hardware, and then we'll put it out on PC and to other platforms. Microsoft's also going multi-platform. And so with this death of the exclusive, I don't know. I think Microsoft is already seeing this in the form of way, way steeper, lower console sales. If Sony goes down this road, I think they're going to see a steep decline in PS6 sales, because people will realize like the hardcore gamers, as they get to be, they dwindle, they get smaller, they get older. They're more willing and capable to put up with Windows and building a gaming PC or buying a gaming PC. Also, that's gotten a lot easier than it used to be. I think the end game here is basically everyone who's into AAA gaming 8 years from now. We're on a trajectory where it's just going to be everyone. If you care about that, you got a gaming PC, and if you want to do it on a TV, you plug it in with HDMI, right? Or like I do, where I've got it in my computer room, but also over a HD base T, like Ethernet to HDMI dingus. Yeah, it's hard to find an argument that would say like money being no object, that the console way is better. Sometimes the computer stuff is finicky, but like in my experience the last few years, barely any more finicky than the consoles themselves. So yeah, I got a PS5. It's collecting dust. I don't know. There's not even anything in the pipeline there that's got me excited. Switch, because Nintendo, like whereas Sony, by even just having some games come to PC, they have now, I think, undercut the not credibility, the sense, the illusion that there's something sacrosanct about like, this is a Sony game, this is a PlayStation game on PlayStations. And once that is demystified, I think people will no longer treat the PlayStation as special. And I think Nintendo has been very smart to think that as soon as a game exists outside their platform, it is no longer a Nintendo game. The Nintendo console is part of the experience. That vertical integration is really important, similar to Apple, right? So Nintendo, I think, is going to be more successful. Hopefully the Switch 2 isn't another Wii U follow-up to the Wii kind of thing. But I suspect that they're going to stick to their guns and stick to their dedicated hardware, and I think they're going to be better off for it. Because, you know what? Switch is the console I use most, even though it's like 8 years old, because that's the only place I can play those games, short of emulating them, which has now gotten harder. So yeah, that's my console take, I guess, David. I would encourage you to... I think now is a pretty good time to look at buying gaming PC parts, because there's been a little bit of a contraction, and GPUs are a lot cheaper than they were a couple years ago. So there you go. We did it, everyone. That's the mail. That's a mailbag. Boy. Well, I'm going to miss you. I'm going to test out some microphone setups so that if I do want to record while I'm overseas, I can. I've got my all of my audio plugins and my Logic Pro set up on my laptop if I should choose to do so. I'm going to go pack. I'm going to go get ready to go. I would love to hear emails, hear your emails, see your emails. I would like if you sent me emails about travel. Travel questions, travel experiences, travel advice. Knowing I'm going to be traveling all over the country in Japan, especially like the back half of May. And with no destination, I'm just going to be wandering around. So if there's anything in Japan you want me to go see, maybe I'll just fucking get on my rail pass and go. Let me know. My goal in life is to see every cool thing there, I guess. So, well, my goal in life is to be able to shout at a stranger in a gas station in Florida and then not get shot. But my other goal in life is to explore everything that Japan has to offer. So if you've got any questions or want me to go check something out, let me have it. And thus concludes the program. Thank you.